On Thursday, May 7th, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met with his U.S. counterpart Hillary Clinton to discuss bilateral relations. In a joint press conference, Clinton assured journalists that the two nations were cooperating smoothly.
We had serious and open exchanges about areas of common concerns and are looking forward to Moscow in July when President Obama and President Medvedev will meet. Our negotiators are hard at work. We're also proceeding with other initiatives to help store or to stop the spread of nuclear weapons and to safeguard fissile materials.
Meanwhile, last week, NATO troops began training exercises in Georgia. Only last month, Russian President Dmitry Medvedev warned this decision was dangerous.
Я считаю, что это неправильное решение, опасное решение. Потому что когда тот или иной военный блок проводит учения вблизи от тех точек, где еще совсем недавно была очень высокая степень напряжения, и где и сейчас все совсем непросто, это грозит всякого рода осложнениями.
The Real News spoke to William Engdahl, economist and author of A Century of War, Anglo-American Oil Politics and the New World Order. His upcoming book is titled Full Spectrum Dominance.
On the 6th of May, NATO began something highly provocative in that hotbed situation. They started military maneuvers, joint military maneuvers with the Georgian government, and they'll last until the 1st of June, just after their local elections in South Ossetia and Abkhazia, the two breakaway provinces that were the subject of the military conflict last August. Now, why is that provocative? First of all, you have a highly unstable head of state, the man that Washington put in there as president back in 2004, Mikhail Saakashvili. And Saakashvili, it later came out, at the time it was blamed on Moscow, the military action in Ossetia last August. It later came out in Ukrainian parliamentary hearings that Saakashvili ordered military aggression into South Ossetia, a region that was under a joint peacekeeping protectorate at the time, and simply made an attempt through military force to grab the territory back. At the same time, he was applying for membership in NATO. Now, the NATO bylaws of the NATO treaty are quite explicit that if one NATO member country is attacked, then it's the responsibility, the obligation of all NATO member countries to join in defense of that country against the attacker. That would mean implicitly that NATO would be called on potentially, if Georgia were to become a full member, NATO would be called on to go to war with Russia. So you have a highly unstable situation. The United States lost face big time last August when it came out that Saakashvili had initiated this, that Condoleezza Rice was in Tbilisi talking to Saakashvili days before the military action was launched by him. And I think you have some people playing with a very, very dangerous and unstable situation on the borders of Russia. It's a complex situation, but in the end, it's very simple. NATO really is moving step by step right up to the door of Russia and of Moscow in a military encirclement as the Russians see it. And that's something that's destabilizing to world peace. Europeans right now are very heavily tied into Russian natural gas. And the energy supplies of Western Europe are really a part of what's being called the new great game over energy. So Georgia is right smack dab in the middle of that. And that's why you had a regime change sponsored by Washington back in 2004 in the first place, to get someone who would be friendly to that pipeline and friendly to Washington in as president of Georgia. That Baku-Tbilisi pipeline is a major strategic pipeline. The Washington policy has been to try to encourage Kazakhstan to link its offshore oil and gas flows into the Baku pipeline through Tbilisi as well. And Azerbaijan is also a source of large natural gas resources. And there's a Nabucco pipeline project, which Washington also supports, in an attempt to end run the Russian gas provider Gazprom, which is a state company, and bring natural gas from Azerbaijan, potentially even from Iran. That makes a very interesting background to why Washington is sounding a more friendly tone with Tehran in the current administration. I think they're trying to lock in some of that Iranian natural gas into a supply line that would end run the Russian gas supplies. There is an organization called Shanghai Cooperation Organization that was set up by Russia and China, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and several of the stands back in 2002, initially as a talking forum, and it's now, because of Washington's provocative actions in Iraq, and not only, but in Afghanistan as well, it's turned more and more into kind of a mirror image of NATO in embryo, kind of. In other words, a way of creating a defensive organization of collaboration between the countries of Eurasia and an economic organization of collaboration also on energy, also on pipelines. So ironically, Washington policy has created what the father of British geopolitics, Alfred Mackinder, called more than a century ago, called the worst case scenario, and that is a cohesion of the nations of Eurasia in a common economic sphere of influence.
As long as the threat from Iran persists, we will go forward with a missile defense system that is cost effective and proven. If the Iranian threat is eliminated, we will have a stronger basis for security, and the driving force for missile defense construction in Europe will be removed.
As Putin pointed out in January 2007 in a conference in Munich, this is not about Iranian nuclear missile threats against the United States or against Western Europe. This is a provocative preparation for a nuclear first strike capability against Russia. Because the very simple matter of missile defense is it's not at all defensive, it's highly offensive. If two nuclear powers, imagine you have a nuclear stalemate between Russia and the US, one of those two powers builds even a primitive missile defense, so the US can launch a preemptive first strike against Russian missile silos and counter strike capability. And with a missile defense the few missiles that would survive and be able to launch against US targets would be knocked out by the missile defense in Poland, and also aided by the radar array in Czech Republic. So very clearly Russia sees this as not at all defensive. This is highly offensive and destabilizing to the world order. It's madness. It's literally madness. But there's no public debate about any of this. That's the most incredible thing. At least during the early 80s, when Reagan proposed his version of Star Wars, there was a huge public debate about the destabilizing effects of these systems on the status quo. Today, there's not even a peep of informed debate. The nuclear weapons scientists who've issued papers on this have been blocked out of the mainstream media. Where in U.S. media has there been a rational, informed debate about how provocative this is from the side of the Pentagon? Nowhere. I've not seen it.
Donate today and receive a new documentary film available to members of the Real News Network. The History of the National Security State with legendary author Gore Vidal. Bonus features of the DVD include an in-depth response to Vidal from ex-CIA analyst Ray McGovern, who served under 7 U.S. presidents, an exclusive interview with Colin Powell's former Chief of Staff Larry Wilkerson, and an insightful interview with oil policy analyst Antonia Juhas.
The news magazine of the screen. Living glimpses of history in the making.
Hollywood and Washington is a symbiotic relationship. They both deal with illusions. Reality doesn't often play much of a part. I think I saw through the myth of the Cold War almost from the beginning. I was a Washington political kid from a political family. Roosevelt first had radio because he had a this great speaking voice, and everyone liked to hear. Truman proceeded to break every arrangement that Roosevelt had set up for a peaceful coexistence. And Truman thought that it would be a good idea. Why not just stay armed all the time? And then he devised the national security state. You've got to go up and swear allegiance to the United States or else you're a commie. I mean, we had imported fascism. We get Dwight Eisenhower, who said that we have this great military industrial complex. It is a dangerous thing. And he said this is going to change everything. And the way our country's governed is going to change us politically. Along comes Jack Kennedy, who wanted to make his mark, believed in the Cold War. But he said, in this kind of politics, it is the appearance of things that matters. I think everybody should take a sober look at the world about us. The national security state still exists, only it isn't communism anymore, it's terrorism. This is the most serious thing that has happened in the history of the United States. Knowledge is power. We need an honest news system.
We need the real news.
This is the sort of thing we can build right now without anyone else's permission from the government or from the business community. It's the powers in our hands.
If we're not going to sleepwalk into more wars, we think we need to start with a television news network that won't bow to pressure and has the courage to seek facts. And that means independent economics. And that's why we need you.
Make a tax-deductible donation now of at least $10 a month or a one-time give of at least $75. As a thank you for your support, we will send you the new documentary film, The History of the National Security State.